emancipation. I don't know, they kind of rhyme, it sounds nice together. So creation and emancipation. And kind of especially exploring not just the way that the Sabbath ties us to the Creator God and kind of ties us to who that is that we worship. It also ties us to a God who sets his people free. And there's a large aspect of the Sabbath that focuses on freedom as well. The God who wants freedom for his people. So that's our overall month theme. We're going to have a few different, we're going to approach this out from a few different angles this month, as we usually do with all of our topics. But this evening, as we kick things off, we're talking about how prejudice changed the Sabbath. It says there, kind of ironically on the flag, Sundays are for Jesus. So, as we get started, just a book recommendation. This is a book that you brought it because you probably knew where I was going with some of this stuff. But The Lost Meaning of the Seventh Day by Sigve Tonstad. It's a great book. Really digs into the Sabbath and pulls out some themes that a lot of times we don't really think of. We think the Sabbath is pretty cut and dry. And in some ways it is. This isn't really suggesting anything new or outrageous. It's just pulling some understandings and dimensions from the Sabbath that sometimes we don't think about. And we'll explore some of the ideas of this book throughout the month. This is not a presentation drawn directly from this book, but it definitely has been inspired by this book. And it's an interesting read, definitely a very deep, meaty read if you are into that kind of thing. So, introductory statement. Jesus was famous for framing his teachings with this formula. You have heard it said, but I tell you. Right? So he says, you have heard it said, ... I tell you this. And so he kind of presents these traditional understandings of things. And is Jesus actually changing truth when he says this? Or is he challenging kind of a perception of truth?
He's reminding
So what he's doing, exactly, he's saying, you've heard it said, right? And you heard it correctly, by the way, but I tell you. And he kind of develops it further. So this idea of eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, you've heard that said, but I tell you, turn the other cheek. Right? And so he's not taking this first statement and saying, okay, well, that's totally wrong. What he's saying is, but that wasn't the ideal. The ideal is turn the other cheek. So he's kind of developing this. And even he himself says to his disciples before he leaves them, before he's crucified, he says, there are many more things that I can tell you, in John 14, I believe, but you couldn't bear them right now, right? And so God kind of delivers truth piece by piece, and so this is kind of an understanding that we're kind of starting off with. So I'm going to start off with a similarly phrased statement this evening, and see what you think. So you've heard it said that the Catholic Church, or maybe more specifically Emperor Constantine, changed this Christian holy day from Sabbath to Sunday as a way to endear sun worshippers to become Christians, thus blaspheming God's law and also watering down Christian doctrine for millennia to come. Right? This sounds familiar? Mm-hmm. So, if you've ever heard of the website Snopes.com, has anyone ever gone here? Okay. So Snopes.com is a place where and different people believe whether or not, how accurate and how reliable it really is. They tend to like a lot of their takes on things, but Snopes.com is a place where if you hear something, like, oh, I heard that, but I can't find a source for it, I don't know if it's true or not, I just kind of heard maybe this thing specifically, a lot of times political thoughts. I heard this political thought, but I'm not sure if that's true or not. Maybe a lot of people are saying it, but is it true? So it kind of gets to the bottom of the situation fast for you. And so, if we were to take this statement that we just read, you have heard it said, the Snopes.com, I think what we would end up with is a mixture, right? And so this is one of the ratings that they have. It's either true, false, or mixture. So it says this rating indicates that the claim has significant elements of both truth and falsity to it, such that it cannot be fairly described by any other rating. Right, so it's sufficiently not completely true, not completely false. And so what I want to suggest is that this is not necessarily wrong, but you have heard it said, but I tell you, non-Jewish Gentile Christian leaders and believers gradually moved from Sabbath to Sunday worship over time due to their dislike of Jewish people. And so we're going to kind of explore that concept today. We often like to find one scapegoat. One scapegoat is really easy and really convenient. To say, like, this person in history was terrible, we'll just throw all of our blames on that. But a lot of times that really kind of shirks some responsibility for us, some considerations that we might have in some way that the story might affect us as everyday people. And so we're going to explore this concept this evening. So Bible verses, right? First I want to establish, we all know this, but let's kind of explore the Sabbath from beginning to now. We're kind of going to go through biblical and also historical kind of timeline of the Sabbath. Of course, Genesis chapter 2, verses 2 and 3, by the seventh day God had finished the work that he had been doing, so on the seventh day he rested from all of his work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. So, from the beginning, right, this is not a new concept by any means. It comes right at the beginning. Mankind is given the Sabbath from the beginning. This is not a commandment that comes around at Sinai. And of course, Exodus 20, verse 8, there's many more verses to go along with this. But remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy, right? So he reiterates this at Sinai. And this is something that we find as a thought and a theme throughout the Old Testament. And then, of course, we have Matthew 5, verse 7, where Jesus, and this is one that Adventists love, right? Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them, right? So he's not coming to change these things. He's not trying to say that we no longer have to keep the law. He's saying that I am the fulfillment of the law. Through me, you actually see the fulfillment of the law. And I've already preached a sermon on how the law is really a transcript of God's character. And if that's true, well, Jesus came to make God's character more evident to man. The less of, he's more approachable than the God of Sinai. He is our friend Jesus, right? So a turning point in Christian history is the stoning of Stephen. And the reason that I bring this up is because after the stoning of Stephen, the probation of the Jews is over, right? We have a focus during the Old Testament on Hebrews, on Jews, on this specific group of people. That doesn't mean that it's the only group of people that God worked with throughout that time period, but the Old Testament chronicles specifically that group of people for a purpose. The gospel, though, after the stoning of Stephen, then is found to be taken to a broader context and broader audience, out to the Gentiles, to every nation, right? Which was Jesus' very own wish when he sent everyone forth, the Great Commission. So Peter and Paul and Philip and others spearhead this movement to not just focus on the Jewish people, but now they're bringing the gospel to a wider audience. And this is a huge shake-up in Bible history. By the way, a lot of times we really kind of, when we explored this, I think last week in our Sabbath school lesson, a lot of times we really undermine and downplay the enormity of this in Bible history. Because nearly the whole Old Testament is focused on Hebrews, Jews, their customs, their traditions, right? And many of these are developed by God himself, right? So suddenly questions start arising. What does a non-Jewish believer look like? That's a huge question that they had to answer. How do they act? How do they behave? Worship? What were their obligations to old traditions? Jewish moral law, which would be the Ten Commandments. Jewish ceremonial law, which would be kind of the vast plethora of different commandments that we find in the Old Testament. And so we find it all kind of come to a head, actually kind of throughout the New Testament. A lot of the writings of Paul, a lot of the various writings, especially by John and Peter and some of those guys, they're all very focused on kind of correcting some misperceptions. And a lot of them battle with these, what they call Judaizers. And Judaizers are kind of these guys who are pushing Judaism too hard. They're pushing Judaism when Judaism is kind of done away with. It's no longer what God is invested in. He's bringing things forth to a more Christian context, right? So they have this Jerusalem Council. This is one of the more famous chapters of the Bible where it really hits this idea head on. What do we do with these old perceptions of Judaism, and what does a new non-Jewish believer look like? Should Gentiles be circumcised? Should they keep the law of Moses? These are some big questions that people have. And it's interesting because Peter, this is Acts 15, but Peter in verse 10 says, don't put that unbearable yoke on them. Right? We haven't been able to bear it. Our forefathers haven't been able to bear it. These are things that no one has been able to do completely successfully. He says, don't put that on them. Now, how does that make you feel? It's interesting, isn't it, right? Because there's a lot of these old customs that seem very positive, maybe beneficial. And James, in verses 19 through 21, I'm just going to quote that real quick because it's a really interesting and huge statement. Again, sometimes we underplay how big of a statement some of these really are. James says, it is my judgment, therefore, that we should not make it difficult for the Gentiles who are turning to God. Instead, we should write to them, telling them to abstain from food polluted by idols, from sexual immorality, from meat of strangled animals, and from blood. For the law of Moses has been preached in every city from the earliest times and is read in the synagogues in the Sabbath. Okay, so kind of what he's doing here, and there's some different takes on what this last sentence means, but pretty much what he's saying is, look, these things are all being taught in the synagogues, they're all being taught to Jews, we're all practicing them, we all like them, but these are the things that we think are important for Gentiles to focus on. Now that's a few things, and what I mean by a few things is not many. Right? This is not a lot of things that he's emphasizing that Gentiles are responsible for. And some people even look at this as an excuse not to keep the Ten Commandments anymore. But it's this misperception of what is the law of Moses. And so, to kind of look through that, this law of God, or moral law, is what we usually think of as the Ten Commandments. This is the law that is placed inside the Ark of the Covenant. Deuteronomy 10, verses 1 and 2 says that it's placed inside. It's given this special privilege where God's law, the Ten Commandments, are placed inside. But then the law of Moses, or the ceremonial law, is something a little separate, right? Many other laws are found in Moses' writing, hundreds, many laws. And this is placed beside the Ark of the Covenant, interestingly enough. And that's in Deuteronomy 31, 24 to 26. So we find that there are kind of two understandings of the law, two categories of law. And when it says, for the law of Moses has been preached in every city from the earliest times and read in the synagogues on every Sabbath, and it's kind of disregarding that as something that Jews appreciate, but we're not going to make Gentiles necessarily focus on that. He is talking about the law of Moses, which would be categorized as the ceremonial law. So a lot of these extra laws that come along with the law of Moses are kind of being excused at this point. And actually, interestingly enough, if you look into Adventist history, it's this kind of an understanding that early Adventists appealed to before Ellen White received special visions, special help to kind of guide her towards a health message. They appeal to this. And they say, by the way, we can eat pork. We just killed a pig. In fact, you can read in James Wright's handwriting, and he said, we just killed a big porker, and we're about to roast it just now. Like he's writing back to someone and saying, like, we're about to eat a pig. Calm down. You can eat pork. But then later on, so it's actually that vision that kind of brings Ellen White back to the health, specifically the health laws, but not all of the ceremonial law, not all of the law of Moses. So time passes, right? Originally, Jews have the power in the religious world, even in the Christian world. It's largely Jewish believers, right, that are converted to Christianity, and they go around and they bring this gospel to the Gentiles. Well, over time, gradually Jews lose favor in Rome due to revolutionaries, right? And so you have different kind of categories of Jews in the time of Jesus and then shortly after. You have, of course, the Pharisees, who are kind of the pastors and priests, right? They're the ones carrying on the traditions to their utmost. You've got the Essenes, which are these guys who kind of were like, we think of a monk in a monastery, that's kind of an Essene, like these guys living in caves and being very separate from society. If you've ever read the Dead Sea Scrolls, these guys are responsible for that. They were carefully recording a lot of materials in caves away from the people. You have the Sadducees, who again you read about in the New Testament. These guys had kind of compromised with society. They were like, well, we love our roots of Judaism, we love kind of the idea of being Jewish, but they did away with a lot of the traditions. They did not believe in miracles, and they really kind of associated with the ruling class. In fact, even I think Herod the Great, I think, was kind of technically a Sadducee. He was a Jew, but he didn't really practice Judaism, and he was just a part of the ruling class. But then you had this fourth class of Jew, the zealot, or the revolutionary. And these guys were like assassins. I mean, they would like go through the crowd. There's like a political figure, and they have this dagger in their cloak, and they just swipe the guy and move on. I mean, they were very stealthy. I mean, these were people who were going to take the kingdom by force. They're going to take it in their own hands and make sure that God's people, God's kingdom triumphed over evil, right? So they were so focused on this that they were considered revolutionaries. But you've got these groups of Jewish revolutionaries that start to put a bad taste in the mouth of Rome, and even in the mouth of Christians who are now focused on a heavenly kingdom, not this earthly kingdom, not this ethnic kingdom, and they don't want to be associated with this revolutionary flavor that's going on in Judaism. It becomes more and more prevalent over time. Christian persecution, by the way, begins in Rome in 64 AD under Emperor Nero. Shortly after that, Jerusalem is destroyed in 70 AD because of, again, this insurrection against authority. And this is seen by many people as divine judgment, Christians especially. Christians seek to differentiate themselves between Christianity and Judaism. And so Sunday worship actually is a practical way for them to do this. So Sunday worship begins among Christians as a way to say, hey, we are not Jews, we are Christians. And it's interesting how quickly this happens. I'm going to go through a slide here that gives early evidence for Sunday keeping a lot earlier than a lot of times we even really think. Ignatius of Antioch, this is early 2nd century, so probably around 110 AD, very early. Those who were brought up in the ancient order of things have come to the possession of a new hope, no longer observing the Sabbath, but living in the observance of the Lord's Day, on which also our life has sprung up again by him and by his death. And this is early. By the way, Apostle John probably died around 95-ish AD, so it's probably within 15, 20, max maybe 30 years of his life after the last apostle dies. So this is very early on. Justin Martyr, mid-2nd century, so not too much later, says, but Sunday is the day on which we all hold our common assembly, because it is the first day on which God, having wrought a change in the darkness and matter, made this world. So he's kind of saying Sunday was the day that God started creating. And Jesus Christ, our Savior, on the same day rose from the dead. So he's appealing to creation, appealing to resurrection. This is the day that we worship. Now, this is not necessarily biblical, but again, they're using kind of biblical language, referencing biblical events to say this is the day that we will now worship on. And again, this is before any edicts by any rulers. These are people who were Christian leaders, early Christian fathers. They wrote a lot about Christianity in that day. It kind of gives us a peek into what was going on very early on in Christianity. So Christian anti-Jewish rhetoric accompanies this historic move to the Lord's Day. So it's not just we want to be separate. it is also, these people are perhaps even bad, and we don't want to be associated with them. Ignatius of Antioch again, probably within these years of 98 to 117 AD, said, "For if we are still practicing Judaism, we admit that we have not received God's favor. It is wrong to talk about Jesus Christ and live like Jews, for Christianity did not believe in Judaism, but Judaism in Christianity." Okay, so he makes this differentiation that the logical step from Judaism is to Christianity, so why move backwards? He also, you see the shift that it's not just wrong to expect Gentiles to adhere to all Jewish customs, which is what we find at the Jerusalem Council, but now this shift has gone towards actually that it's wrong to practice Judaism at all. Judaism is a problem, which was not the case at the Jerusalem Council. They were saying that, okay, well, we will practice these customs because we've grown to love them and we've been circumcised and we're bound to those laws because of that. But these guys are saying, no, Judaism is bad, and we should not be worshiping as Jews do. Justin Martyr, again, an early church father, between years of 100 and 165, quoted, writing letters to a Jew named Trypho, says, "We too would observe your circumcision of the flesh, your Sabbath days, and in a word, all of your festivals, if we were not aware of the reason why they were imposed upon you." So specifically Jews, right? It says, because of your sins and your hardness of heart. So we find this now characterization. The Jews are especially sinful, more so than these Greeks or non-Jews who are writing. Hard-hearted people who need extra laws to keep them on track. And by the way, that still didn't work, so they're really bad. I mean, so they're starting to emphasize this characterization that Jews are not good people at all, inherently. So then, this is part of the history where we find Emperor Constantine, right? 313 AD, he institutes the Edict of Milan. He decrees, finally, to cease all of the persecution of Christians, to accept them as, brethren in the kingdom. They could legally worship in Roman territory without fear of persecution. Now, this did not, at the time, make Christianity the official religion of Rome, as is sometimes conflated. But he did, however, institute the first Sunday law in 321. Where he said, "On the venerable day of the sun," so Sunday, "let the magistrates and the people residing in the cities rest, and let all the workshops be closed." Now, by the way, how many years have Christians been worshiping on Sunday before this? Like 200. That's a long time. So a lot of times, I'm not saying that we shouldn't give Constantine a bad rap, whatever, but in a lot of ways he did a favor to Christians. I mean, he stopped the persecutions. That's probably positive, although I don't know, maybe persecution would have been good to continue. Maybe it would have kept people on the straight and narrow, but he undoes the persecution and then officially makes Sunday the worship day throughout Rome. But this was, again, not something that he imposed on people, not something that he said, okay, well, we're going to make this big change. Christians were already keeping it. And so to endear them to himself, we often characterize it that he just endeared, he did it to bring in sun worshipers to the kingdom. And that was probably an added bonus. But he actually was endearing himself to Christians who were already keeping Sunday as their holy day. But it continues, right? It doesn't just stop there. John Chrysostom, and this is 344, 407 AD, in that time period. The synagogue is worse than a brothel. It is the den of scoundrels and the repair of wild beasts, the temple of demons devoted to idolatrous cults, the refuge of brigands and debauchees, and the cavern of devils. It is a criminal assembly of Jews, a place of meeting for the assassins of Christ, a house worse than a drinking shop, a den of thieves, a house of ill fame, a dwelling of iniquity, a refuge of devils, a gulf and abyss of perdition. I would say the same things about their souls. As for me, I hate the synagogue. I hate the Jews for the same reason. So this is early Christianity, already starting to see not just dislike, not just a desire to differentiate, but an actual hatred towards synagogues and those who worship in them. So again, characterization. Jewish synagogues are unholy places and Jews are devilish, evil people. Not just that it's bad to worship like Jews do, but now Jews are evil. Now Emperor Theodosius the first establishes Kuntos Papulos, which is what the decree that made Nicene Christianity, specifically those who adopted the Nicene Creed as their creed, the official Roman religion. Persecution instituted against non-Nicene Christianity and various pagan and polytheist beliefs and religions. It was also this and other laws passed by Theodosius I that gradually led to the persecution of Jews by the Christian Empire. Another, and this is from James Everett Seaver in the persecution of the Jews in the Roman Empire. He says, another new element was widespread adoption of a superficial Christianity by upper-class Roman society. Now, this brought an already anti-Jewish group into the church. So Jewish leading society was already against Jews. We see that Christianity is already against Jews, so together they kind of mesh into this real hatred of Judaism. For the wars of the 1st and 2nd centuries had destroyed Jewish popularity with the Roman ruling class. The Roman military was ever watchful for Jewish rebellion, and this was the soil in which the hostility of the church fathers found it easy to sow the seeds of hate. Okay, so this kind of milieu is developing in which now it's not only theologically believed by the government that Jews are bad, evil people. It's this thing that's just being championed as just a truth at this point. It's no longer just the belief of some people. It's now just common knowledge in the empire. The Jew had, as he is encountered in the pages of the 4th century writers, is, as Parks points out, not a human being at all. He is a monster, a theological abstraction of superhuman malice and cunning, and more than superhuman blindness. He is, as we have just seen, rarely charged with a human crime, and little evidence against him is drawn from contemporary behavior or his actions in contemporary events, which means it wasn't necessarily anything they were doing at the time. It was just this characterization that said they are evil. They were looking for them to do bad things, and even when they did it, they blamed bad things on them. That's kind of where this is going. So we fast forward a little bit, right? Maybe this phases out a little bit over the years. We find that by the time we get to Martin Luther, who we all know and love, right? Martin Luther in the 15th and 16th centuries writes this: "What shall we Christians do with this rejected, condemned people, the Jews? Buckle up. First to set fire to their synagogues or schools. This is to be done in honor of our Lord and of Christendom, so that God might see that we are Christians. Second, I advise that their houses also be razed and destroyed. Third, I advise all their prayer books and Talmudic writings in which such idolatry, lies, cursing, and blasphemy are taught and be taken from them. Fourth, I advise the rabbis be forbidden to teach henceforth on pain of loss of life and limb. Fifth, I advise that safe conduct on the highways be abolished completely for the Jews, for they have no business in the countryside. Sixth, I advise that usury be prohibited to them, and that all the cash and treasure of silver and gold be taken from them. Seventh, I recommend putting a flail, an axe, a hoe, a spade, a distaff, or a spindle into the hands of a young, strong Jew or Jewess, and letting them earn their bread in the sweat of their brow. But if we are afraid they might harm us or our wives, children, servants, cattle, etc., then let us emulate the common sense of other nations such as France, Spain, Bohemia, etc., and eject them forever from the country." So that's Martin Luther. on Jews. So this is not a rhetoric that went anywhere in Christianity. It actually gets even stronger and stronger until he, towards the end of his life, writes this book completely focused on how evil Jews are. It's called The Jews and Their Lies. That's the name of the book. And so he is, at this point, just stating truths in his mind. This is just how the world works. Jews are bad people, and this is how you should deal with them. And John Calvin, a little more briefly, who was shortly after Martin Luther, says that the Jews, their rotten and unbending stiff-neckedness deserves that they be oppressed unendingly without measure or end, that they die in their misery without the pity of anyone. So these are guys, by the way, who really helped shape Christian thought today. They very much did. Lutheranism, Calvinism, these are very strong currents that still are among us today, and so their words are meaningful, aren't they? So here comes the tough part. That wasn't the tough part, right? Because now we're going to connect with contemporary, a little bit closer to contemporary society. It's 1933, 1945, the Holocaust. German Christians largely supported Hitler and his reforms, by the way. This is something that gets kind of covered up a little bit, and it's unfortunate. But Christianity, because of their understanding that Jews were just bad people. I mean, this is something that's been going on for a long time, since, certainly since 400 AD, but even before that it starts to germinate, right? It goes all the way to the early 1900s. And so they largely support his reforms. Minority of Christians, including infamous Dietrich Bonhoeffer, do strongly oppose him, but the majority is for Nazism. This includes some of the Adventists in Germany. And that's an unfortunate part of our history, but I want to state it because it's important to know. Right? It's important to know this is where we came from. These are some of the compromises we made and some of the things we missed because we agreed Jews were bad. Now, to be fair to these Christians, the full scale of what he was doing was not apparent at first. But he never hid his anti-Jewish rhetoric, and that was something that I think did endear Christians to him. That's part of why he got away with as much as he did. So, tie to the American Jim Crow era. I don't think this is a huge leap of logic because we find that there are similarities between the way that early Christians start to view the Jew and then the way that they, in early American history, view the black man. The brute caricature portrays black men as innately savage, animalistic, destructive, and criminal, deserving punishment, maybe death. This brute is a fiend, a sociopath, and antisocial menace. Black brutes are depicted as hideous, terrifying predators who target helpless victims, especially white women. And this was, remember, talking about Martin Luther, and one of the things that he mentioned was if we fear that Jews will harm our wives, well, kick them out of the country. They don't even be there anymore. So this becomes a characterization in the similar way of the black male in the Jim Crow South. Charles H. Smith, writing in the 1890s, claimed that bad Negro is the most horrible creature upon the earth, the most brutal and merciless. Clifton R. Breckinridge, a contemporary of Smith, said that the black race, when it produces a brute, he said is the worst and most insatiate brute that exists in human form. These are hard words to read, but again, very similar to the characterization of the Jew by Martin Luther and other theologians, right? So it's this characterization of the black man that caused many white Americans to uphold African slavery in the United States, and later Jim Crow oppression and segregation as virtuous necessities, even using the Bible to support their beliefs, completely missing that slavery in the Bible, by the way, is focused on benevolence, restoring someone to their fortunes, helping them in the meantime, caring for the misfortunate, and within the context of the eventual Jubilee year, which we'll talk about next week. We're going to focus on Jubilee laws, right? In the Bible, slavery was understood that eventually these fortunes that were lost would be restored. and the playing field would be even, which is very different than anything that ever happened in the American South or North. Official Jim Crow segregation was ended in the 1960s, but the brutish characterization of the black man still lives on today, as we discussed in last month's sermon on America being the second beast of Revelation 13. This has and continues to affect not just American society at large, but American Christianity in particular. Some sects, like the Mormon Church, just very recently giving up their very institutional official rules that black people could not be admitted into their church and could not be saved. So in the context of Seventh-day Adventism, Oakwood University was founded because black students were not allowed at other universities. As recently as 1965, years after segregation had ended, Southern Adventist University began to accept black students. The actual Ku Klux Klan, however, famously monitored the dorms and to put the kibosh on integration between races even after 1965, and even held cross burnings on campus. I say this, I graduated from Southern Adventist University. I love that university, but it has some history. And even in the 1970s, my professor's wife reported cross burning on the campus of Andrews University, far north of Southern Adventist University. While this might seem in the past, even just 3 years ago, Adventist young people were discovered to be posting racist messages on the app Yik Yak, which is an app that allows you to post publicly but keep your identity hidden. They were posting aiming at a black guest preacher, and it was discovered who these students were. But this is something that, even though it's not institutionally allowed, it still does exist, even among some Adventists. So today we're struggling with the segregated church. While you might not notice it in a diverse urban setting like Racine, Wisconsin conference churches are very integrated here. The many SDA unions in America have regional conferences or black conferences that historically support local church ministry to minorities, right? Which is a positive necessity in many ways. For example, the Shalem Church in Waukegan, the Sharon Church in Milwaukee. Now, I never knew this. This is something that I learned as an adult. Right? Like whatever the actual definition of that is. You guys probably still look at me like I'm a kid. But, when I was at Southern Adventist University, I learned this for the first time. I grew up in a church that was very diverse. It was a state conference in Indiana church, but it was very diverse. So I didn't know that there were supposedly white conferences and black conferences, but they exist, right? And I learned that, and I was very surprised. And now, even though many would like to see them come back together, we still have these segregated conferences because of political reasons. It's very difficult to bring them together because no one wants to be the one to give up their job if you're going to merge two conferences together. Well, who's going to be the president? The black president or the white president? Well, then that gets kind of touchy. So for political reasons, it lives on, right? So in the same way that anti-Jewish sentiment in the early church caused Christians to abandon the biblical model of Sabbath, anti-Jewish and anti-black sentiment has caused Christians to abandon biblical ideas of benevolence, unity, and even Christian love altogether into the 20th and 21st centuries. So while World War II and Jim Crow are not just yesterday by any means, they're also not that long ago. Especially if we start looking at some of these, earlier quotes that we were looking at in like 300 AD, even as early as the 2nd century AD. These are pretty recent. These are new rehashings of old methods of prejudice and social disenfranchisement that American Christianity is still recovering from, by the way. I mean, this is not just completely in the past, and we know that by what we look around and see today. Christians carry with them many prejudices today that can often get in the way of ministry and even divert the believer from truth. We've already talked about how many SDA believers, many Seventh-day Adventist believers, are so anti-Catholic, right, that they will reject the biblical concept of Trinity as Catholic heresy. We spent a whole presentation on that before. That they've been convinced that since Catholics believe in the Trinity, and their version of the Trinity is unbiblical, but that we have to throw out Trinity entirely, even though it is a biblical concept. So a lot of times opposing something, hating something, wanting to differentiate from something so strongly can lead you to actually reject truth. Some Christians are so vocally anti-LGBT plus that they spread perceptions of hate and intolerance above perceptions of love and grace, right? And I'm not saying we should, necessarily approve or accept that lifestyle, but to just preach hate so strongly can give the characterization that Christians are more about hate, by the way, than they are about love. There's this book called Unchristian, if you've ever read it. Very interesting book that basically polled American, I think it was just in America. Have you read it? I think it's just in America, but it polls believers that were kind of millennial age, so like my kind of generation. They polled them, and one of the strongest perceptions of non-Christian Americans was that Christianity was about hating other people. That was a characterization of the religion in their mind. Some Christians have embraced the political party so strongly that they are no longer willing to see the opposite party as American or even human in strong cases. Have you noticed this? So this is one reason, by the way, why I don't share my political views very freely. If you've ever talked politics with me, sometimes I will, but not really in public, because I know that it can just be like that. You can't unsay something, and someone in the audience is going to say, I can't trust this guy anymore because he voted for so-and-so, or he believes so-and-so kind of policy, and it's just kind of like, wow. It's a real thing that, and especially in my generation with this need to overshare things, people are just self-destructing their influence in the church, unfortunately. For many, politics define religion, by the way, interestingly enough. It's no surprise that and this is just an example in Adventism, but young politically conservative Adventists tend to attend GYC, which is a Generation of Youth for Christ. The original name was General Youth Conference, but they had to change that. But they tend to be more conservative, not just theologically, but a lot of times politically as well. And young politically liberal Adventists are likely to attend the One Project, which is no longer in circulation this past year. But it's interesting that you have more, not just liberal religiously, but also politically, young people are attending that gathering.
So what does the TOP stand for?
The One Project, that's what it's called, yeah. So you have these kind of two gatherings in Adventism that kind of shows that there is a distinct culture, even just politically, not necessarily just spiritually or religiously, within the Adventist church. Remember Philippians 4, verse 13, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, right? That's an important thing to remember in the context of all of this, because overcoming prejudices is something that we need Christ's help for. But we can accomplish it if we have His help, and we ask Him, right? Also, Romans 12:2, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, and that by the testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect, right? So with His help, we can not be conformed to the pattern of this world, which tends to be prejudice, right? And it's one of the patterns of the world. But we can be transformed. Our minds can be renewed in Him. So the question that I want to ask in closing, and this could, be a brief discussion, or it could be, this could springboard into, another 15, 20 minutes. But my question is, what prejudices do we have as Christian individuals, as Christian institutions, that are getting in the way of our ministry and mission? And what can we do to get rid of these prejudices? Because as we've seen, the pattern is that when we are prejudiced against someone, we often reject them so hard that it leads us away from truth. It diverts us from important things like the Sabbath, important things like Christian benevolence, like a biblical understanding of the Trinity, of love for our neighbor, of unity, which, by the way, is such an important theme in the Bible, but we don't see unity in our world at all. So we're not going to solve the world's problems tonight. That's not the point of discussing or of looking at all of this, but it's a good discussion to have so we can start brainstorming these solutions and counteracting damage that has been done or that could be done by continuing with this. So it's an uncomfortable question, but what do you think? What prejudices do we have? How can we overcome them?
I don't want to be brutal, but I am gonna, I would dare say that, and it's not written, I would dare say there were some people in the crowd when Noah was preaching. And there was perhaps someone who didn't like him. And so the decision on the part of the person who didn't like Noah perhaps would say, I don't like him, I'm going to fix him, I'm not going to get on the boat. And so the majority of people sit on the fence. And I think this is one of the meanings of God shaking the fence, clearing the fence. And because there's only going to be two groups. And it's unfortunate that some individuals' eternity is going to be based on this kind of decision making.
You know, and it's interesting because when you look throughout the Bible, there are many stories when it's not, I mean, it's the message that's rejected, but it's also the person, right? You know, I preached a sermon about Elijah and how he was characterized as the troubler of Israel, right? That was his name, and so they called him that, and so, you know, to go along with him was to go along with the troubler. Well, you didn't want to be a troubler. You know, when you characterize people, when you place a brand on them, an identity upon them, it causes people to reject them completely along with any truth that they might have, right? You have, throughout Jeremiah, all sorts of prophets. And by the way, they never use the word false prophet in the book of Jeremiah. All these prophets, and all of them are preaching, our kingdom's going to be good. Like, you know, king, you just keep going the direction you're going. Like, that's the right way to go. Jeremiah comes along and starts preaching truth, and they all characterize him as just this completely negative person. You know, he's a naysayer. He doesn't want to get on board. He's not supportive of his king and his government, his country. And in the end, he was right. But they characterize him as, you know, this troubler, right? This person that we should not associate with. And so a lot of times we find that kind of gets in the way of being able to accept truth. You know, we build up a prejudice against someone. How many times have, you know, you heard from this friend and that friend and that friend that this particular preacher is bad news? So you kind of have this view of that person, like, oh, that's negative. I don't want to hear anything he has to say because he's going to try and trick me. He's going to teach me false truth. But like you just once said, let me just listen to what the guy had to say, and you said, you know, this is really good. You know, some people, and you find out, oh, this person doesn't like him because of, you know, this conflict they had in the past, you know, or what's that?
He's stepping on their toes.
Because he's stepping on their toes, right? You know, I've also preached a sermon on when Paul brings the message to the Thessalonians, right? And he's preaching truth, but they say this man has turned the world upside down. They characterize him as this troubler, and they rabble rouse, right? They get people all through the streets, and they run him out of town. They try and kill him. They characterize them as these, you know, insurgents, these dangerous people, but they're just preaching truth. So how many times do we do that? Do we characterize someone? And then we can no longer hear their message past our perception of them. It's a good question to ask, and I know that I've had to overcome some of that myself.
I think it's been become more prevalent in the general culture today.
Yeah.
To you know, the way you take away someone's influence is by painting them as something that can't be trusted.
Right.
And our church has done that. Our church has done that historically too. So we're not immune from it.
Oh yeah. And there's plenty of people who, you know, various leaders in the church. You know, if you hang out in certain groups of Adventism, well, Ted Wilson isn't even an Adventist. You know, and you hear all these rumors. In fact, I just read an article from Adventist Today. They talked about their most misunderstood article of all time, and it's where someone wrote. They wrote out a hypothetical letter that they thought Ted Wilson should write to the Pope. Right. So they frame the article that way. They say, this is what I think Ted Wilson should say to the Pope. He should make this statement. And I forget even what the statement was, but the point was, the original article made it clear, this is hypothetical, and I think he should say this. Well, some people then go along and remove the introduction and start passing around the article as if he did write it. And then so people all over now are looking at this article and thinking, he wrote this? And he's not even an Adventist.
That's why you have Snopes.
What's that?
That's why we have Snopes.
Right, exactly. That's why you have Snopes. So we don't have that for Adventism. Of course, maybe we need an Adventist.
We should have something equivalent, right?
I think the hardest and saddest part that we have to look at is our church is only as good as its weakest link.
Mm-hmm.
So if we have people in our church who are prejudiced against Muslims or black people or Jews or whatever it is, or
LBT.
Yeah, or the disenfranchised, the women who's sleeping around or whatever. Where's the love of Christ? He touched and reached all these types of people, you know, who are the outcasts, and we're not doing that in His name.
Who would be the tax collectors and prostitutes of today? That Jesus associated with.
Right. And Jesus was all about, by the way, breaking perceptions. Right? When he tells the story about, when you come across the stories of the rich young ruler and of Zacchaeus, right? The perception is, well, the rich young ruler is a great guy and he's going to go to heaven. But at the end, it says, wow, how difficult for him to go to heaven. It shatters people's perceptions. Pharisees, or the Good Samaritan is another example where he's shattering people's prejudices, people's perceptions of a certain type of person. And then he goes to Zacchaeus, who people say, oh, that person's obviously going to hell. And he says, salvation has come to this house today. Wow. It's just amazing what Jesus did.
What portion of the population can we apply that? Salvation has come to their house.
Right, who are we looking at and saying, obviously they won't be saved, and Jesus is saying,
right.
I want to go to your house.
So they go from no hope to hope.
Right.
You know, your question was, to start this discussion, what prejudices do we have? And many times our prejudices are based on our own misconceptions of people, as you have named throughout this history lesson. But how many of us think about the people who we fit into those categories, we have prejudices about, and we never reach out to them? Because it's safe not to know them personally. Mm-hmm. It's safe not to get personally involved in their lives. Exactly. It's safe to see black men on television who've been convicted of a crime and say, yeah, that's what those blacks do all the time. That's safe. But how many of us, whatever our prejudices are, go to those people? How many in this church, I was here when you had that homeless shelter. We were here when a homeless woman was here looking for food and looking for a home. How many of us get to know the homeless people? And maybe you do, I don't know. But we have our misconceptions often. We categorize people, we put them in a little ball and say, this is where you belong because you deserve it and you've done all this to put yourself here. And we're comfortable doing that, but we're not comfortable confronting the issue. Say, what are my prejudices? How can I understand myself better so that I can serve people as Jesus served? Jesus served those who were the outcasts of society. How can we do that?
Right, when you see a homeless person, is that person just a freeloader? You know, or is that person mentally ill? Right? And sometimes, depending on your experience with some of these people, your characterization can be totally different.
Absolutely.
And you know, doing a homeless ministry, I tell you, like it's an amazing experience the first time that you see your homeless friend, you know, on a regular basis, and like your heart is like, happy to see this homeless person where like maybe normally you might think, oh, like I don't want to
But
get trapped here, you know?
don't miss my point.
Yeah, yeah.
Because you stepped right into it. If they're homeless, they probably did something to make them that way.
Right.
If they had been responsible, if they had gotten a better education, if they had taken advantage of the opportunities that they had, they wouldn't be in this situation, so it's their own fault.
Right.
We forget every person in the world is a product of his or her upbringing. And you cannot take that away and just say if, and blame them for everything that you think
Right.
is the cause of that problem. Those thieves, they're just lazy, they don't want to work. You don't know how many times they've been rejected. You don't know how many times they've had problems getting jobs because people won't give them an opportunity.
Right.
You don't know what goes on.
And you also don't know how quickly you would turn to thievery yourself, maybe given some of the same
Absolutely.
situations in life.
And recognizing too that there's systemic injustice in the world, and sometimes that's what causes people to be in positions to get what.
He was telling me about this impound car lot in Chicago and how huge it is. Can you imagine getting your car in there and you want to get it out, but day after day after day goes by and you have to pay every day. So people just give up, you know.
Yeah.
But Jesus didn't feed the hungry because they were deserving. He fed them because they were hungry.
Right.
You know, he saw the need and
He met their needs, right? And he mingled with them as one who desired their good, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Also, you have
I don't know if I want to say this, but
you can tell me afterward, or you can say it now.
this is a first-hand experience that I had. I have a very good friend who worked some years ago in the General Conference in Washington. And I forgot the guy who was the head of the White Estate in D.C.
Deal on White Estate, yeah.
And he wanted to, this fellow wanted to go up into the New England area to research Ellen White, you know, I guess look at her descendants and then sort of track back.
Right, because there's the question of whether she was actually white or not, right? That's kind of what you're referring to.
And he went, and he had planned his trip to be so many weeks. Well, he came back early, and my friend asked me, he said, "You're back early. Why'd you come back early?" The only folks he could find up there with the name Harmon were black, so he came on back home. And so you figure it out from there.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, yeah, there's different things that can really shatter your perceptions.
But what difference does it make? She was our prophet. God picked her and she said yes.
Amen.
Well, it may or may not.
It does.
But historically, it could be significant.
Well, it shouldn't make any difference to anybody if it does their prejudice.
Sure. I'm just saying it could be definitely an interesting detail to add, though, to the story.
Judge not, and you be not judged.
Right.
But maybe it would make the black people feel more part of our church then.
It takes more than that.
Well, and it's you know, interestingly, you know, her son did start the. You know, it was, in fact, this is the son, by the way, who rebelled his whole life until he got older, and then later on, when he came back to the church, his idea was to go down south and minister to the slaves down there.
That she was black.
And I think that's interesting. What's that?
Is that Willie?
Not Willie.
I don't remember his name. He helped.
Edson.
Edson. He helped
Edson, yeah.
out Oakwood.
Yeah.
He was instrumental in the start of Oakwood.
Right.
Now
Edson looks pretty white in the pictures that I've seen of him, but
Check her nose.
what's that?
He said his son.
No. Yeah, sorry. Her son does. Yeah, and I'm not.
Oh, sure.
You know, I definitely don't know the truth behind the matter. I just, you know, I know that it's less ambiguous, I think, when you look at him. But you know, again, I'd be interested to get to the bottom of it. It's definitely an interesting question.
Well,
What difference does it make?
it's just interesting.
What difference does it make?
It's interesting to me that God intended for something to happen when he, the other fellow's name, by the way, was William Foy.
Yeah, way before, that's right.
So Foy, Hasten Foss, and Ellen White. God was the thing they all three have in common is the blackness in their line, in their lineage. And I don't know if that's something God was intent on doing, but that's what happened.
It's interesting, and I'd be interested to know, that's a question that we can ask God in the new kingdom, right? Like,
Whatever
what was the plan?
doesn't mean Jesus loves everybody.
Well, he wants to clear that fence. And I think that fence is, if these facts all came out, some people are going to think like Fred, and other people are going to think otherwise. But that fence is going to get cleared.
Right.
With the program when speaker Cunningham came and his
Yeah.
wife did the program in the afternoon on mental illness and how much it is brushed aside and not
Yeah.
addressed. That could be a prejudice because in the old times, once you had a mental illness, it's because it's a sin of your parents, of your heritage, or you must have sinned. And we in turn tend to treat people differently because we do not understand that mental illness.
Right.
Just like how we have spiritual illnesses, we do not understand it, so therefore we shy away from it. But if we need to go out into the world, we need to understand it and then be empowered to be able to handle it.
Right, and there was, I know people today who, if you're depressed, well, that just means you don't have a relationship with God, and that can be a damaging thought. I know one of the things that we talked about in seminary when we talked about, counseling and that kind of stuff was the differentiation. Like a lot of people just associate, well, mental illness in general, all types, are just demon possession. And it's kind of this kind of back up, wait a second, there could be extreme cases where there is some of that present, but there also just are these effects of sin, right? We live in a sinful world and our bodies are not perfect and they rebel against us, not just, physically outside of our brain, but within our brain as well, So it's, that can be definitely a huge prejudice, That person, they're always sad, they obviously don't believe in God, it's too bad. A perception-shattering graphic came out that I thought was interesting, in the way of like political bias, was that it actually showed that Seventh-day Adventism is one of the most balanced, like as far as like, just about 50% of Seventh-day Adventists are Republicans, 50% are Democrats. And I know a lot of people looked at that and said, wow, I didn't know Adventist Republicans existed or Adventist Democrats existed. Like, like depending on the context you live in, because we live in a segregated world and we live in a very, you tend to associate with people who are like-minded, right? Some people just, I talked to someone, they said, I did not know that you could be a Seventh-day Adventist and a Democrat. Like that just blows my mind. Because in their mind, Democrats are bad people. And they've characterized them as such, and so like you can't be both. And you can't have the truth and also be misled. So it's interesting, so a graphic like that comes out and says, oh wait, by the way, half the church doesn't agree with you at all. It's like, oh, interesting. Shattering perception. So,
I always thought Republicans were bad.
well, and you have that on both sides, right? So anyway, we're not going to solve all of the world's problems, but it's a good discussion to start, right? What are our prejudices? And let's be real, we're not just talking about other people's prejudices. We all have them. We all have prejudgments we make when we look at people and, different types of people who are different than us. Maybe even people who are the same as us. We assume, well, since you look like me, you are the same as me, but they might be very different. These prejudices, these prejudgments, they're not helpful, and when taken into extreme cases, they can divert us from the truth. So,
I would sum it up by saying, be careful of your prejudices, because they might cost you.
they might cost you. Yeah, I think that's a true statement.
that point that you just made, that politically Adventists are very, diverse. It seems to me that it would be a mistake for a church to institutionalize one particular political viewpoint.
Right. Well, and that's kind of what we're traditionally fighting against as Adventists, right? We don't want to remove the wall between church and state, not just in our country, but in our own religion, right? And you have plenty of people who look at Adventism and they say it is most compatible with this political party. And those people, if they had it their way, would make it all one party. But you know what's interesting, and what I think I'll end on here, is that in Counsels to Writers and Editors, Ellen White makes it very clear that she does not think uniformity, by the way, unity is a good thing, but uniformity, us all just agreeing to believe in the same thing and saying, this is exactly what Adventists believe, no question, it has to be this or get out. A, you never learn anything new, you have no reason, no one's challenging you to look things up. When you have those different viewpoints and that balance, you can sharpen each other as iron sharpens iron, right?
And it flies in the face of what our church has historically represented, right?
Yeah.
We have never been a church that says we don't believe this, and this.
Right.
We've always been a church that has advanced in light, right? We've always been a church that has understood the concept of present truth.
And I think as much as we try and move more and more towards defining things, right? I mean, we're looking, not next year, but in 2 years to possibly add a 29th fundamental belief. We keep defining more and more strictly what it means to be an Adventist. The truth is, we got started as a belief that said, we all believe in the Sabbath, we all believe in the second coming, and there's a lot that we don't agree on, but, we can work together towards that goal.
Exactly.
And so uniformity can be a problem because it gives us prejudice against those who don't agree with us or don't toe the line. But unity is what we want to focus on. And unity is harder than uniformity, by the way, because we can enforce all kinds of uniformity. We can make all kinds of people say that they agree with us under penalty. But unity, working with people even when we know we disagree, even when we know we're different, that is what Jesus prayed for in John 17. That's what he prayed for, and that's what we can maybe pray for as we close this evening. So I want to invite you to bow guys with me. Heavenly Father, as we close, we look at just the overwhelming prejudices in our past, in our own church, Lord, and even not so far in the past, even today, Lord, we look at our own lives, we see prejudices, we see characterizations of people who are different than us. And as tempting as it is to just cut the people who are different out, I pray, Lord, that you would give us a burden for unity, that you would give us a burden to love our brother and to see our brother not as just people who agree with us, but people who are very different. Lord, bless us as we try and remove the scales from our eyes with your help so that we can view people as you view people. And I pray, Lord, that as we do this, you would equip us with the ability to bring you glory and to better reflect your love in the community around us. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.